Afternoon, it's Gareth Wood again with this week's story. I got a few stories written over the last few days, so I polled earlier on Twitter just to see which story would come out on top. And after announcing that it's a story about a man who falls in love with a glory hole, Formica Heart won out. So it's good to know what kind of stories people want to hear, and glory hole love stories seem to be the topic of the day. So we shall crack on with Formica Heart. Hope you enjoy. The wind blew Reed's raincoat up around his waist, and he pushed it down with growling frustration. He cursed his luck. He cursed the weather. Of all the nights for Gus to bluster through the ashen city, it had to be this. It had to be one during which he was making a call to a new glory hole. Now Reed was wearing a new suit, a three-piece. He wanted to make a good impression. After all, the usual places had become somewhat dull, and for one reason or another, Reed had begun to find the toilet argumentative and obstructive. Gone was the rough and seductive moor in the Formica walls, and in its place there had developed a yattering and critical gob from which he could barely withdraw his sloppy gristle before the moaning began. Reed had scoured the web for recommendations, and rated peephole.com had myriad thumbnail pictures of dingy stairwells and rows of blank cubicles. There were many user reviews that endorsed this toilet for soft, welcoming jaws, or that toilet for fast hands, quick relief. Reed shrugged those off. He was a romantic. He fastened his raincoat tightly and bent into the yowling squall. The old part of the city was devoid of people at night. It sang hauntingly as the drafts danced through the locked office doorways and ornate balconies. Reed had been looking forward to this visit for days. If it hadn't been for the delay in having his new suit adjusted at the tailor's, he would have made it to this place by last Sunday. But he couldn't change that now, any more than he could change the fact that one of his legs was an inch longer than the other. Upper Vaudeville was an entirely lavish district, a baroque preservation of past grandeurs and marble excess. Lived in and worked in by a select few, Reed was shocked to learn that sat there, tucked away at the far end of a seldom used alleyway, was, according to his findings, an elegant tiled public toilet with two cubicles that served as, according to one former user, the most luscious wooden hole rammer in the entire south of the city. Reed stood at the top of the staircase and marvelled. In the wind-bitten depths of night, the locale was plush and free of the inveterate parasites that hung horribly around those facilities he frequented more often. The banisters that led down to the entrance were curved and bronzed. Reed could not detect so much as a scratch on them. The steps were marble, and the intricate vascular markings sketched a welcome to descend. The door was heavy. Dark bronze rivets pocked the panels, and Reed had to use his full weight to gain entry. The toilet was beautiful. It was immediately beautiful. It was stunning. Azure tiling ran across the walls, and each of the three mirrors mounted above the heavy white basins were backlit by thin green bulbs. Reed gasped as he saw the taps. Oh my God. They were intricately carved to resemble seahorses. Even the urinals glistened in the moonlight, which sank easily through the barred street-level grids above. A thick, floral perfume covered the bitter musk of recent ejaculate. Reed blinked away visions of sperm wads. They just weren't particularly romantic. He nervously allowed himself to look over at the two cubicles that sat quietly at the far end of the room. The polished wood shimmered in the half-light, and Reed could see the grain in the wood, and that too was beautiful, and both doors were closed. He walked up towards them and marvelled at the structure. The panels reached from the floor to the ceiling. Oh, this baby was tall. There were no cheap gaps below the panels. They were completely sealed. They were private. Oh, this baby was shy. Reed felt almost dizzied by the idea of such concealment. He ran a tremulous hand over the nearest panel of the cubicle, and the varnish finish was smoother than his own skin. Oh, baby, he groaned. His fingers edged around to the door of the cubicle, and he pushed it gently. The old hinges opened silently, and Reed stared dazedly into the welcoming abyss. The splendid emerald tiles, the spotless pan with thick wooden seat, the raised cistern with an intricately woven chain leading to a carved flush, all of it combined to form the greatest toilet cubicle he had ever seen. Yet it was the panel which separated his cubicle from the other which made Reed gasp with delight. Like a nervous yet enthralling wallflower at the edge of a crowded bar, or a demure introvert chewing the tip of a pencil across a silent library, the panel stood with sensual calm and bubbling intensity. And Reed was compelled to lean back against the parallel panel as his eyes dropped to the orifice that had been carved caringly at roughly the height of his waist. It was a perfect circle, the perfect hole. And nervously, Reed extended his hand, his index finger distended with arousal, and eased them into the dark cavity. The surface was so smooth, the walls of the hole. It wasn't like the Formica or cheap plastic gaps in the other toilets. There were no rough edges, no savage sawdust soreness, and Reed pushed his fingers further and felt warm and clammy breath meet their tips. Gritting his teeth, aroused into rigid reverie, Reed quickly unfastened his new suit trousers and forced himself into the waiting void. He had to sit down. Limping hazily from the toilet, Reed found the first bench and fell upon it. Panting and allowing the tempered wind of the city night to wash the sweat from his face, he stared at the unmoving moon anchored to the heavens above, and all he could see, in place of the burning yellow sentry, was a maw. A polished slit, a portal to orgasm, his glory hole. And just like that, lay on the bench like fly-tip rags, Reed fell in love. He returned each night for the next 7 at the same time. Sometimes he wore a new suit. Sometimes he wore something casual but smart. He doused his neck and cheeks in aftershave, and he tried as best he could to disguise the issue of his one long leg. Reed slunk into the soundless toilet and marvelled at the odours of saccharine flowers, wet streets, and his own musty semen. As the week wore on, Reed spent more time speaking to the panel. He rested his face near to the crevice and whispered ideas and dreams into the darkness. Sometimes the shuffling would shake him from his imaginings, and responding to the hole's eager and unspoken demands, he would unzip and grip the walls. Work at the mortuary began to suffer. Reed's usual attention had waned. Ogilvy, the senior mortician, had to bark at Reed to ruffle his days, as the saw he was using to pop the skull cap meandered directionlessly across the forehead and into the nose of the corpse. "Christ, Reed! They're having an open casket!" Sorry, Reed jumped. "I'm sorry." "You bastard lummox! I'll be here all night sewing that wretched conch back together." I'll do it. Reed offered meekly. Ogilvy weighed him away with a handful of kidney, plunging it hatefully into the scales. "No chance, Reed. I dread to think what misdemeanours you'd manage to accomplish if you had to work into the night." And Reed dragged his leg to the mortuary door, noting the fat-encrusted heart that lay next to the unfolded ribs of the chubby stiff. And somehow he felt that his heart was now lighter and dreamier than that wad of hard muscle that had powered the latest corpse. He saw his heart like a feather now. He imagined it drifting out from his overcoat and gliding easily into the glory hole. And as he hurried to his precious panel that night, it was this very vision that cracked like a hurled egg as he realised his cubicle was occupied by another. And glory holing had always had this problem for Reed. But he had never loved a panel or a toilet before. As he pushed the door gently, he heard the unmistakable wet congress of fuck. He gritted his teeth as the sloppy dance quickened. A groan and the evident scrotal drum solo signalled climax, and as Reed hobbled back towards the sinks, the door opened and out walked a filthy-looking man. Sniffing his fingers and licking his lips, this bearded bastard walked unashamedly into the centre of the room and adjusted his crotch, at which a wet-tipped protuberance hung like fruit. He grinned yellow and fag-begrimed teeth at Reed and farted loudly. "Oh, needed that," he whispered, and walked up the ornate stairs and out into the ether. Reed edged towards the cubicle, hearing spitting from the neighbouring box. The smell of recent and sweat-laden sex hung in the air, and Reed's fingers found the opening, and he withdrew them immediately, bringing forth the remnants of the stranger's stringy ejaculate. Reed's eyes filled with tears as he played this trespass over and over in his mind. How could you do this to me? How could you betray me with this other man? And if you want him, you can fucking have him. and he kicked at the door, and it crashed against the panel, rocking the entire unit and the cubicle to its right, and Reed heard the noise of hurried movement in the panel closest to the wall, but he didn't care about whoever was in there. His glory hole had been violated, his panel, his love, and Reed returned to the stairs and stormed up into the street, sobbing loudly as he did so. Reed had not visited the toilets for 3 weeks when he saw the body. Ogilvy had lain off during the past fortnight, and Reed's work had returned to its usual professional level. And so, rather than barking insults at his employee, Ogilvy had returned to the endless silence in which they were both so very comfortable. Now, Reed was eating his cheese sandwich when Ogilvy called to him. "Make sure you wash that down well, Reed. There's a messy one when you come in." Reed sighed and drank his pint of tomato juice as quickly as possible. A little Tabasco, just the way he liked it. The new corpse was a messy one, but Reed's gleeful expression was so incongruous that Ogilvy shook his head in disbelief. "Why are you grinning, Reed? This man has been almost sawn in two by that car." And Reed stifled his amusement and apologised. "Just a funny joke I was reading before I finished my lunch, Ogilvy. And if there was a joke, and then it was the fact that lay there on the slab, opened up by a speeding chassis, the face less relaxed than when he had last seen it, was the man who had violated his cubicle 3 weeks previously." And Reed resolved to return to his glory hole that very night. Now it was dusk when Reed arrived at the top of the Indigo steps. He panted heavily and stared into the welcoming opening of the door, and he knew the bearded man could not have been back. He knew that he was opened up on a morgue table with old Ogilvy weighing his liver for the files. He'd been a fool to storm away from his love when he did. Forget the other glory holes, the cheap trembling plastic with its grey flecks and graffiti scrawl. These were just whores. They weren't the real thing. They weren't love. They weren't his love, like this toilet, like that beautiful, shy and adorable panel. Oh my God. They could only offer him gnarled and piecemeal penetration. The hacked gaps he had to thumb himself through in those wretched train station or bus depot toilets were anathema now. Here was the real deal, and he, the fool, had stormed away from it weeks ago. Not again, never, I would never do this again. This time he would be leaving with his love, and nothing was going to stop him. So Reed glided down the stairs with the weight of unfurled cotton, like the feather that he imagined he was when he first saw that fat heart. Floating through the door, Reed was almost compelled to collapse by the serene environ of that ornate and aged public toilet, that sanctuary of the polished hole. He stepped eagerly across the tiles and pressed his face against the closed door of the cubicle. "Oh, I've missed you," he squeaked, as he leaned into the happy abyss one more time. And there it was, the panel, the carved entry midway between its floor and ceiling. And once again his fingers lurched from the sleeve of his pressed shirt and found the slit, and once again they met warm and throaty breath beyond. Running solely on instinct, Reed began to unzip. He shook off the base desire and lifted his bag of tools to the seat of the vintage toilet bowl. "Not yet, baby," he growled. "Not until we're somewhere private. Truly, truly private." And Reed removed the bone saw and set to work. He had to be careful. It took him 2 hours to trace the edges of the panel, and Reed was careful not to scratch the varnished skin of his love, to harm the panel, to harm it, to scar it. He would rather have died. Once it was loose, Reed slowly manoeuvred it from side to side until it was free of its shackles at the ceiling and the floor. Edging sideways from the door, Reed twisted the panel to his left and carefully, desperately, dragged the heavy wood into the solid luminescence cast from the grating above. He rested his beloved panel against the wall and turned back to the cubicle. And Reed was not surprised to see his wife sat in the neighbouring stall, the barrier that had separated them removed by his careful sawing. "Reed," she ventured, thinning her eyes and seemingly taking in every inch of his person. "Reed, when are you going to come home? The kids are asking about you and we haven't heard from you in weeks, Reed." "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes glazing with emergent tears. I'm sorry. But I'm in love with this panel. You see, this glory hole, we're meant to be together. I'm in love. We're in love. It's reciprocal. We love each other, and I wanted to tell you sooner. I did. I really did. But I just didn't have the courage, you see. I was scared. I was scared. His wife stood and reached out a hand to his shoulder. Reed, you do know it's who's on the other side of the panel that matters, don't you, Reed? A flash of confusion pocked his brow and grew quickly into annoyance. He stepped back, and his soft tone had immediately vanished. I knew you'd try and stand between us. I knew this would happen. I knew you would try and block this, block me being happy. I knew that's what you would do. I knew you would try and spoil this, what we have, what me and the panel have, the whole, the glory hole. I knew you'd try and do it. And why can't you just let me be happy? Reed, she said calmly. It's happening again, isn't it, Reed? Maybe it would be a good idea if you spoke too. No, he snapped, and hoisted his precious panel beneath his arm. We're leaving. We're going. I'm done. I'm finished. We are in love. I can only hope that you can find the same thing as I have one day. And with that, Reed and his cherished glory hole walked into the new night and began their lives anew. I hope you enjoyed that. What's not to love about a story that concerns a man falling in love with a panel with a hole in it? So I do. I hope you enjoyed that enormously. As I mentioned earlier on, there's a lot of new stories for the new collection, and so if I get time between the edit of the novel and general day-to-day existence, I shall try and record another couple over the bank holiday to put out. But until we speak again, all the very best. Take care, look after yourselves, and I'll see you down the line.